Presenting now is Mary Irongesit Umossoh. She is a Nigerian music scholar who earned a PhD in ethnomusicology at Lagos State University. She holds an MA in music education from the University of Lagos. She is a fellow of the Ile-Ife Institute of Advanced Studies IIAS and the Global Arts in Medicine Fellow GAIM. In 2024, she received the IIAS Small Grant and a 2-week study grant, the Lagos Studies Association 2-year grant for a women mentoring program, and the Teaching Critical AI Literacy Workshop grant. Her career vision emphasizes using music and technology to inform and support education in Africa and globally. She is presenting Cultural Responsiveness in Children's Ensembles, Decolonising Representation through the Ndito Uforo Akwa Ibom Troupe.
Thank you so much. My name is Mary, as been introduced. Today I'll be talking on the cultural responsiveness in children's ensemble, decolonising representation. As we know, that music has long carried memories, moral instruction, communal identity across African society, not as entertainment alone, but as a mechanism through which history and value passed between generations. And this mechanism has been affected by globalisation, missionaries, Christianity, and Western formal schooling combined, has affected the intergenerational relationship that is carrying down the research, carrying down this information. The influence, just like what Udo said, the influence of alien culture in the society has been on the increasing and has greatly affected the growth of traditional musical practices. This is not a small claim, and it's born out of fundamental scholarship on Nigeria and African music. Scholars like Nketia, Akpabog, and Izewi, all of whom established decades ago that indigenous music is an integral system of knowledge and social organization, not just an aesthetics practice, but here there is a gap. The scholarship has almost entirely concentrated on adult musicians and adult institutions, children who will ultimately determine more than anyone else whether a tradition survives into the next generation has been comparatively overlooked. This gap is what this study addresses. This study is guided by an objective: one, the intergenerational transmission; one, then indigenous pedagogy and children as agency. This translates very directly into 3 research questions. And what are the questions? How do children ensemble function as a conduit for transition and preservation amidst globalized pressure? To what indigenous pedagogical method do they use? And how do they use this method to express African knowledge system? And how do children act as an active agent in sustaining and reshaping representation? That I won't dwell much time on. I'll quickly go to my theory. The theory which I'm using is Schechner's performance theory, and I make use of 4 concepts. One, the ceremonial center, where he said the cultural place, that is, cultural place produced when a community writes, that is in a ceremonial place. Then I move to the braid of rituals and entertainment. Then the third, the originality by Tuna, he supported that, Schechner used that, and the restored behavior. A little brief of explanation on that. First, the ceremonial center, Schechner ideas is that cultural place isn't defined by being designated venue. It becomes a meaningful through the recurrent pattern of community gathering, there performing and displaying. This troupe rehearsal space become a significant precisely because of the repetition, not because it was built on designated for the purpose. Then the second one, which is also the ritual, where he talks about how Western really colonized the aspect that African is serious about this, the seriousness of rituals and entertainment. So what Schechner did here was he explicitly rejected the Western hierarchy that treats ritual as serious and entertainment as somehow lesser or derivative. Then thirdly, the illuminality, which Schechner draws from Tuna's Tuna, that's Victor Tuna. Performance are in phrases, that is between. As we know, children are in between. Then fourthly, restored behavior, which Schechner said before a performance is being performed lively, it would have been gone through a repetitive means, and it's been rehearsed several times, and also exaggerate rhythm and rhythmic action. I quickly go to my method. This is an ethnographic method whereby I make use of, this data was gotten from my research project. So I make use of, for this paper, I just picked 10 primary sources of my data, the children and the director. To my next slide, I'll quickly go straight to my findings. Number one finding that I got on the field, that is the epidemic resistance and cultural preservation. One, the recruitment is, for that, the first thing I want to establish is the distinction. The selective use of Western tool is not the same thing as a concessor to Western standard. The director uses a smartphone tuner. He extended the traditional pentatonic Ibibio xylophone, which is called the comb, to a full diatonic range. But in interview, he framed both of these as his own instrumentalist choice, made on his own term, not as the ensemble blended to an external standard. This point I want to spend the most time on is the oral counting system, which he used on teaching and transmitting knowledge to these children. The children are trained through counting system rather than staff notation. And this is not because it's a direct attempt. This director trained children using counting rather than staff notation. Now, in my early fieldwork notes, I was tempted to read that as a deliberate rejection, as if he knew notation and had consciously set it aside as a political statement. No, this is because he never had a formal or Western education. His own musicianship was orally acquired and simple, and needed no notation to produce competent and performance readiness musician. Then another one I noticed is that the direction of music borrowed, as in they perform familiar tunes using the Ibibio instruments, instead of playing like using Ibibio music on a Western instrument, they used Western music and popular Nigerian music to play on the icon, that is the Ibibio instrument. And one of the songs is even Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal through the Ibibio xylophone. This brings me to a foreign and a cross-ethnic material is being absorbed into the indigenous instrument, not the other way round. So I'll use a video to show how this is being done. Then the next video showed how he that was how he transmits the knowledge to them through counting. Then the next one, using the tuning app. We can see, just like what I said, he extended the xylophone that was pentatonic in nature into a diatonic instrument. And this xylophone, he tempered it to be in F major. He's trying to get the pitch, but then it adjusted the tune in order for it to be in tune. This is the smooth criminal using, sorry, I missed something there. I'll just go on. The next one is indigenous pedagogy method, which, how did he recruit these children? He goes to church, he picked them on the street and family to recruit them. Method is through mentorship, and they always have a rituals whenever a ritual rehearsals whereby they pray. One of the songs they perform is gospel music. In order not to move, in order to keep to time, my last finding, which is on children as a cultural agent, especially when we are playing an Igbo song, one of the students said that he feels like he's passing a message to the students. So I quickly talk on that quickly, then I give my summary on what, as a children, I go on. That children explicitly understand ourselves as a cultural representation beyond our own ethnic group, not simply as a performer. I'll move through the supporting points fairly quickly, saying that I would say that the children become an ambassador of music, representing themselves online, using their ICOM instruments. And the last point deserve an emphasis because it reframed the whole finding. It isn't just children sustaining a tradition. It's children functioning as an active co-producer of their own representation, rather than a passive recipient of what adults hand down to them. In conclusion, this study set out to examine how Ndito Uforo Akwa Ibom Cultural Troupe function as a site of episteme resistance, indigenous knowledge transmission, and children representational agency within a postcolonial Nigeria context. The findings show that the troupe resistance to Western musical dominance is neither declared nor oppositional but structural. An oral community transmitted pedagogy anchored in the director's own oral acquired musicianship produces competent musicians without a staff notation, demonstrates a sufficiency of an indigenous episteme system on its own term rather than a reaction to a Western one. This pattern described here as a decolonial pragmatism, extending to the troupe selective engagement with Western instrument tuning technology and even global popular repertoires, all of which are absorbed into the ensemble practice through indigenous Ibibio xylophone, rather than the reverse, reversing the more familiar colonial direction of musical translation within the system. Children emerge not as a passive recipients of adult transmitted tradition, but as the active interpreters of co-producers, as representation, evidence in their self-narrative motive, their explicit awareness of themselves as a cultural ambassador when performing outside their own ethnic group, and their independent use of indigenous platform to circle their own image. And this is supported by Agawu's 1992 critiques of representational authority and Schechner performance theory. This finding supports the study central claim that children ensemble constitute as an under-examined but generally cited epistemic resistance, one where cultural continuity and cultural agency are produced simultaneously rather than in tension with one another. So I end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Not so much a question, just a comment. Okay. Actually, I'm impersonating Professor Mojola here because he's made this point a few times to earlier speakers about the way we frame what we are doing. And there's a ritual now that we always say, nobody before me has done this, or that this thing has not been studied or has been ignored. And you helped yourself to this ritual at the beginning about children's music. First of all, I think it's a wonderful project you have going. And the richness of children's music is, it's immeasurable, right? But there are a number of writers writing about other parts of Africa. I'm not talking about Nigeria now, but who have been very interested in children's music. Sometimes what they say is woven into other studies. So there are comments that you have to ferret out from other studies. They are not necessarily packaged as a study of children's music, but sometimes they are. So in Nzewi, for example, you will find many very interesting comments on children's musical creativity, which I think would support some of the points that you're making. Okay. And then, of course, I'm pulling a George Doe here. Actually, then, Blacking, for example, Kasadiwa Mukuna wrote a whole book on children's music from the DRC. So it's a small point, and I know it's very easy to play this bibliographical game, but it is also something, I think, for all of us to try to come to terms with what precedes us, because sometimes there may be a real strong support for what you are doing, which you could just marshal to strengthen your argument.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Sorry, there's a feedback and we become comfortable. So if you can help in the room, organizers, please help. Okay, any further comments or questions? There's none online. Is there anyone in the room? Okay, in the absence of none,
There is one, please. There is one, please.
Okay.
Well done, Dr. Mary, for that.
Thank you.
Work on children pedagogy. I was just going to ask, because you said the director didn't have any formal education, could that have been also a disadvantage would there be disadvantages attached to him not being formally educated? And yes, do you see any problem with that,
Okay.
that aspect of?
Okay, what I said, and through my presentation, I said he never had any formal Western knowledge education like staff notation, but one way or the other, he has been in the church, just like where he picked children, and he learned through orally, and where he listened. And if you can see, you would have seen that he was teaching them based on listening, and they imitated what he was doing. And him having that knowledge of keys, and even if there was, because there was a misstop in the other video where he was actually performing Michael Jackson Smooth Criminal on the xylophone. It really showed that he had a good oral, his musicianship is good orally.
All right, I think we'll be able to take one more question. I do have a lot of questions and perhaps comment myself, and I can always pass that to you privately. But I wonder if there's one more question in the room. All right, so I do have a question. So at the beginning, I'm a moderator, I'm not supposed to ask you a question, but at the beginning you said, children as agency. And then you went on to show us, your theoretical framework and diverse, set of big names. So I guess I'll give you my comment first. My comment is you have very rich ethnographic material, and you have, very, provocative project in its own, centering children. And like Professor Agawu said, a lot of people have written on children. And there's also a senior colleague of mine here, Professor Adoa Kosua, who writes on children music. So you can consider that. But I was hoping that you could, talk a bit more about how you theorize children as agency. Where does it begin? Where does it end? What are the parameters that define such agency? And how exactly are those children agents? But I was just fascinated by the idea of, children as agency. And I would appreciate if we can just talk a bit further on that idea, how you theorize children as agency. Then we'll move on to the next presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Is that a comment or I should comment on? It's a question. Okay. How do I theorize that? Using, I actually looked at Schechner's, the third theory that I used that talks about luminality. That is actually the center of it, where children are transmitted. That is, is in between the other. So using that gap, definitely they can remain in that gap forever. They have to transition to another. So within that gap, that space, they are actually transmitting their tradition into the next stage. So I cannot use the next stage as a yardstick for them to be, but that luminality of it, the middle between it, their transitional stage, that is what I base my own theory on to defend my work as an agency.
All right, thank you so much. A round of applause for Dr. Mary. And then we